Community Engagement and Funding Subcommittee of the Contra Costa County Racial Justice Oversight Body. Everyone here is familiar with the history and where we are, so I'm gonna move ahead and say, let's go ahead and go around and say our introductions. If nothing else, maybe for our viewers later in time. I think we all know one another. I know that we do. So yes, I'm Jeff Landau. I am steering committee member of the Contra Costa County Racial Justice Coalition. I'm also deputy public defender in the county, but sitting here as a representative of the coalition. Let me hand it off to Kiki. Hi.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Kiki Ferris. I am the Director of Specialty Field Services at the Probation Department, and I'm on the subcommittee as a proxy for our chief, Issa Eamon-Krause.
Thanks, Kiki. Gigi, hi.
Elder Gigi Crowder, representing the faith community, also the executive director of the National Alliance of Mental Illness here in Contra Costa County. Thanks.
Thanks, Gigi. Renell.
Yes, Ronell Ellis, Health Right 360, Field Operations Coordinator, Reentry Services.
Glad you're here, Renell. Chris, hi.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris James, W. Haywood Burns Institute, consultant on all things our job. So yeah, happy to be here. And thanks to all of you for showing up. The last, I think what's going to be the last our job subcommittee meeting of the year. You know, it can get a little dicey around this time. We know that, you know, it's easy to find all kinds of other things to do, other good things to do, good reasons to, you know, kind of be missing in action. So thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, Patrice.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Patrice Guillory here from the Office of Reentry and Justice. Staff support.
And Jill. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Jill Ray with the Office of Supervisor Candace Anderson.
Glad you're here. And Melvin, I know you were having camera speaker issues, but oh, there we are.
Oh, there we go. Melvin Russell with probation. Yeah, I've been having issues all day, so good to see you.
Yeah, overcoming there. We see you and hear loud and clear, so thanks. Hi, Robin Nicole. We're just going around.
Oh, hello. I'm sorry, I was in another meeting. Hello, how are you?
Very good, thanks. We're just introducing ourselves and ready to begin then. I think we just had, was there another addition? I saw my lineup change for a moment on the screen. And Cheryl.
Cheryl said it. Racial Justice Oversight Body and every committee. It's December. Impossible is nada. And yeah, everything. I'm just gonna say that. I'm on every committee. Everything Contra Costa. How's that?
Yes.
Happy,
that sounds
whatever
accurate.
day this is. I don't even know what day of the week I am in right now.
Another beautiful Thursday, December 8th. Here we are. Glad you're here.
Glad to be here. Upright. Almost.
Reading our chat and smiling. Yes, that's exactly right. Be as comfortable as we can. That'll put us in the most creative and productive and collaborative of mindsets so that we can move forward on our work plan and our agenda. So with ourselves introduced, let's run to any announcements we have. That would be from members of the subcommittee who have something that they want to share before we get into public comment, which will be our next step. So if there's anything not on the agenda, folks want to make an announcement. Okay. Won't be your last chance, of course. So let me open up then to public comment and ask if there is any to share on item that not on our agenda today. Cheryl, please. Hi.
Brittany Griner is free. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all I want to say. And I like it. And I like it.
Yeah, right on. It's gotta say a lot faster than I had feared. So I was grateful to see that news for sure. Among everything else, yeah, little points of light, of brightness. So that, yes, thank you for lifting that up. And yes, with a positive lighting us off, let me then ask if there's no other public comment, we can move to our record of actions from last time. And everybody has then in the chat the link to, thank you, Patrice, you're sharing the screen so that we'll have that content. I don't know if that's coming through for others. Okay, not yet. But again, it'll be on the link that's in the chat.
Sorry, my computer just froze for a second. Give me 1 minute.
No worries, all good. There we are, coming through. Thanks. So having that before us, we have just an opportunity to check and make sure that everything seems accurate. I would highlight number 3. So that's the record of actions from last time, record of actions, right? And we had some discussion last time about incorporating correction and clarifying language about what had happened with the captioning of Marsh Creek as the ranch in error, and that's captured in agenda item 3. So from my vantage point, that's consistent with what we said at the last meeting, but I wanted to bring that up since it was a correction sort of its nature. And then, of course, the other items as well. I didn't note any errors or changes to be made, but let me invite others if they have something to modify. I invite you now. Okay. Not seeing any indication of to modify, I'd ask, or I'll make a motion to approve the record of actions from last time as drafted here and ask if there's a second on that motion.
I can second it, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks, Kiki. All right. Any discussion on the motion now that we've called it? Not seeing any. Let me ask if there's any public comment on the motion. Okay, I think we're ready to go on a vote.
All right, Gigi,
Approve,
I'm sorry.
approve, or whatever I should say. I'm sorry, I'm under the weather.
Yes, okay, no worries. All right, Jeff, since you motioned it, I take it you're a yes.
Yes, thank you.
Kiki, you second, I take it you're a yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
And Ronell?
Yes.
All right, motion carries.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Important as always that we capture correctly so that we can move forward informed and lifting off from what we've already done. So having reached that part of our agenda, this brings us to our agenda item 4, JJCC updates. So let me invite Kiki and or anyone else, of course, who may have info, but here's where I turn to you traditionally, Kiki, to see if there's anything to let us know.
Sure. And as I think almost everyone knows, I am a member of the PICE, as we like to call it, the Prevention Intervention Community Engagement Subcommittee of the JJCC. So those are the updates I have. So we met this past Monday, December 5th. Mr. Trevor Arsenault was voted in as the co-chair of that subcommittee during our conversation. We also had representation from the DA's office this time with Ms. Nichelle Holmes, who made a sort of unofficial announcement that she at least believes that she will be the DA's representation, filling in for Andrea Tavernier's opening on that subcommittee. So it was her first meeting. We also had a presentation from Mr. Larry Lewis about the Richmond PAL program and the up and coming development of a culinary center on 23rd and McDonald. So we heard a little bit about what that program's goal is and the population that they're hoping to provide services to, which is essentially all youth in the county. And they're hoping that that program will become kind of a feeder program for the Contra Costa College culinary program. Then we had a pretty broad discussion about the future work plan of the PICE subcommittee, just trying to sort of hash out what the sort of next year will look like, whether or not any of our objectives, need to be sort of reorganized. And then lots of discussion about figuring out what the process might be to invite other kinds of providers like Richmond PAL, for instance, to come to the PICE committee as sort of a regular standing agenda item so that we could kind of get more familiar with what's in the community. But then also the question arose as to what the nexus would be to get information about programs that we feel could provide services in areas of gaps that we've identified as a committee. What that nexus would be to raise those programs to the attention of the larger body, JJCC. And so we actually have a special meeting planned on January 11th, tentatively. I think they're trying to make sure that date works for all the subcommittee members because there were a couple folks who were absent, but it's tentatively scheduled for January 11th at 3, during which the agenda is largely going to be identifying a potential set of criteria for making recommendations to the JJCC about funding for potential programs that will address service gaps. And let's see, did I make it to the end of my updates? I think I did. So that's what we talked about on PICE.
Thanks, Kiki. Sounds like there was a lot of ground covered there.
There definitely was. We went right up to the last second.
Yeah, must have. So I know in the last item that you were talking about and seeking funding and kind of next steps for gaps in services, that connects well with our community capacity fund work. So I'm interested in discussing that transition and also want to have others' thoughts on or additions to what may be happening in JJCC generally, or feedback on what Kiki had said about the PICE committee, subcommittee. Yes, I saw Gigi, please. Hi.
There's a considerable amount of money with a priority from the governor around childhood mental health. And since it's been determined that, was it 70% of the young people incarcerated live with some level of a mental illness? is this county in a position to apply for any particular funding? Anyone covering mental health and its impact on that committee you mentioned?
I think, are you asking if probation would be applying?
Yes,
And then there
because
was
there's
another.
some targeted, yeah, there's some targeted focus in the governor's budget around incarcerated youth impacted by mental health.
You know, I've written down your question. I don't have a specific answer to that regarding the funding that you're talking about. But what I will say is, you know, part of PICE's role over the last 2.5-ish years now has really been to identify service gaps, and behavioral health and mental health is obviously raised up many times as one of the identified areas of need. Not only sort of in general, but just even I think a bit more focused, because I think the needs show up differently depending on the geographical location, the age group. You know, you can really narrow down those needs quite specifically. And so, and I think you might also know that a part of PICE's work was to get sort of allocated percentage for JJCPA funding to address service gaps. So I think that there is room to do that work with or without the funding that you're describing, but I can certainly give more information about what our plan might be or what our capability is. But you had another part to your question, I think, a different, the last part you said.
Oh, I was just made aware of the funding, and that we should probably be positioning ourselves here in Contra Costa County to look at any grant opportunities so that these young people who have been proven to live with a mental health challenge can get the resources they need. I think that's a major gap in our county.
It is, and I would say, you know, if I could add just one little bell on there, is in my own experience in having these conversations about like mental health needs specifically, what we're finding is that we have the money, but there aren't providers. You know, there are a lot of impacted programs in the community with very long wait lists, and they're having difficulty hiring or filling their positions. So really, I think that the problem is actually not all a monetary funding availability. It's really just having actual physical bodies and people who have the training and credentials to provide the service in those positions. So, you know, oftentimes I end something like that with saying, if you guys know anybody who's providing the services that you think that we need or that we would benefit from knowing about, we're always listening, because that's what we're finding to be an issue, even with the development and the rollout of programs you've heard about, like our last meeting when Ms. Crowder was talking about the rollout of the community pathway. You know, that has even come up in those conversations, is that we're really looking for service providers who will help us eliminate these wait lists, you know, for people. So it's really not a matter of paying for it, I think, at this point. It's just a matter of finding the actual resources that are available, and that won't require, you know, our clients to wait a long time to start. I don't know if that's helpful, but if you know, it might get some wheels turning, perhaps.
I did actually speak with the other Mrs. Crowder and talk to her about some of the child psychologists or psychiatrists that I was familiar with that are doing a lot of remote work, but at least they're there. But I also think there's an opportunity for us to look at non-clinical services, as well as working with the families of the youth as well, or the caregivers, that sometimes that's a critical piece that's overlooked.
Definitely, we agree. The whole person, kind of whole family approach is definitely what we've been striving for more and more as these years have passed, and we've developed all these kind of new program ideas. Jeff, are you raising your hand for me?
Well, yes, I think just to follow up on this discussion that Gigi was bringing up the point, and wanted to make sure that others had the chance to chime in too. But the points that Gigi was raising about funding for mental health was bringing up for me the issue of MHSA funding, which I think I've talked about in this space before. And if not, then I have intended to. Basically had gone through a dive into this area as in my advocacy as people in conservatorship who are from basically all stakeholders, conservator, our side are all saying they're ready for a step down, but it hasn't happened. And that was due to, insufficient resources or insufficient placements. And as I looked into that a little bit more to try to drill down into, well, what is actually out there? The money that comes to our county, and folks may already be aware of this, but it was surprising to me, is in the many of millions and the tens of millions of dollars that comes in annually to the county through MHSA funding. And much of that is core services type of stuff, which wouldn't be the sort of area that would be covered in what we're talking about in terms of potential additional services to reduce recidivism harms of the system. It would be more like nuts and bolts, having hospital staff, et cetera. But then there are pockets of this many millions of dollars of funding that are, for example, innovation fund. So that's about like collaboration between different partners to try to provide necessary services. And some of those pockets are at risk of whatever it was called retraction or being taken away. It was kind of a use it or lose it situation, and saying there aren't any programs that are going to fill this. You're entitled to this money, Contra Costa, but you won't be receiving it if you don't have something to fill in. So as I was looking at that, thinking, man, there's a lot of different projects and interests that we might have, supplemental home services, things like that, that would be very costly, but maybe there's opportunities there. So there's a whole process that's in place, I know, to that budget annually, but perhaps it would be appropriate for anyone here that's interested in these areas to try to participate in that space. It's on my list of things I would intend to do. And then also just to add about, Kiki, your point of the money being available and there being insufficient services, even if we have the money. It's a different world. I had very little juvenile experience in the conservatorship world, but some. And I think when we're talking mental health, we're talking like, crisis residential and or persons that can deal with serious mental illness services that are trained in that area. And I found it was common with adults and sometimes with youth also that there were services outside of area, but not so far away. Alameda County, Solano, places that we don't contract with traditionally for a number of reasons. But if there were more money, perhaps some of those barriers could go away to say we can access some of these other traditional providers that are usually limited to a list of the ones that we're working with. Because if you look at the statewide list, there's many, many, many different types of licensed providers, but there's a limit on how much we can do with existing budget. So I just wanted to put that out there that I see this potential pocket of funding, and then also the possibility of additional contracts if we had additional resources. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Kiki.
Well, I just wanted to add a thought without going down the rabbit hole too far, because I do have a lot of juvenile experience and really specifically foster care experience, and the comments you made me think of that. I just wanted to highlight too that with a lot of funding streams, especially when we're talking about state or federal government, comes a lot of guidelines, a lot of mandatory things that service providers have to do or can't do, and that has definitely impacted like the foster care world, where oftentimes the reform and the funding is very much, comes from a positive intent. But what it ends up doing is it pushes out, some programs that we already had because they're no longer able to meet the requirements that go along with that reform and that funding. And so I would imagine that might be true for a lot of different areas of service providing, whether it's adult or juvenile or anywhere in between. And so what you said kind of made me think about that. It's just something that we have to keep in mind, especially, along the lines of not having the providers, is oftentimes, folks are just not able to meet the requirements that are involved to actually receive the money. And I know we've had many conversations about that and how we all hope to sort of lift up our sort of grassroots service providers and things for just that reason, because it's a real issue. But I also think that could be contributing to why, that sort of use it or lose it money that you've described kind of sits there sometimes, is because people are just not able to do, the 27,000 things that they need to do in order to get the funding or use the funding. And I'll just, put a period on my comments there unless you have anything else.
Thank you, Kiki. I mean, I think that is a logical transition. You're lifting up kind of these gaps and how that would go to our capacity fund concepts of we're aware of there being gaps, and we're aware of there being really, I think each of us probably know, and some of us more than others, and certainly Kiki through the surveys, to know that there are service providers out there, but non-traditional, maybe not falling into the boxes that would have, ready to meet these technical demands for grants and things like that. So with that in mind, I think the capacity fund is something that should be trying to address that gap of really having the community institutional knowledge and proven track record of success. There are those institutions in our county and different pockets of community, and making sure that they're able to access the resources that are there, and hopefully that can be part of the model. My feedback on that, and then ask if anyone else has points that they would want to raise about JJCC as we're on this agenda item before we would transition to our next agenda item. Gigi, please.
The last time I got an update about JJC, there was only one individual on that community track. Has that, as we move toward the holidays and a desire to be home with family and outside of a institution, had there been an increase in the number of the young people who are now in the community track?
I think you're talking about the Briones Youth Academy community.
Yes.
Pathway. Okay. So actually, and I think the one person that you're referring to was something that we brought up, I want to say last meeting, as really it wasn't a youth who was technically on the pathway, but a youth that we had kind of used sort of the framework that was being developed and the terms that were being developed for the pathway. Sort of, I don't want to call it a test case because that makes it seem very specific, but we thought, what if we could try this with this youth before the program is even developed? And so I know that Ms. Crowder mentioned that last time. So, and I think she also told you about a tentative closure date of the ranch that I think is on the agenda today, or the notes from last time, for January 31st. So that actually has been confirmed as Friday, February 3rd. And at that time, we expect that there will probably be only 4 youth remaining at the ranch, but all the staff will transition. That will be their last day at that facility. So then what that would do is those staff will be reassigned to the positions that are needed elsewhere, which will include the community pathway. Mm-hmm. So at that point, that program is going to be staffed appropriately, which was the big issue, if you recall, that Ms. Crowder was talking about before, is that we weren't able to really start utilizing our plan for that program until we actually had the appropriate staffing. So that's kind of where we are there. In the meantime, we very much are, and I can say we very specifically because one of my responsibilities is juvenile investigation. So most of the disposition reports come out of one of my units. We're very much invested in using the least restrictive option. So even if we have to get really creative, with the youth's terms and conditions that we recommend to the court, we do whatever it takes to make sure that they have, sort of the best possible chance at the least restrictive option. So I say that to say, no, we're not specifically recommending the community pathway, but we are still recommending that youth remain in the community with the terms that we feel are best suited for their most positive outcome, regardless of when the program starts to be up and running.
And then one of the fears was that because that, lower level option wouldn't be available, that we'd start seeing more individuals entering, the traditional older juvenile hall. Have you, in your role, noted that? Because that's the work that we need to do with the judges, right? And the DA's office, to make sure that there's not the shift toward more young people going to the more restrictive environment?
I have not noticed that.
Oh,
And
great.
I think we're, as I was saying a moment ago, we're doing everything in our power to make sure that we continue to look at cases individually, and we're only doing what we feel is best for the individual case. I think that, you know, the numbers and the referrals and the amount of youth that we have on probation has really declined. And that's a positive thing over the last, you know, decade or even more recent years. But I think, unfortunately, what we've seen with lower numbers is actually a lot of really, you know, intensive, serious offenses happening among our youth, a lot of which I think a lot of us hear on the news pretty much on a daily basis. And so whenever, you know, we're talking about a smaller number of youth and a higher number of youth committing more serious offenses, sometimes it looks to be something other than what it really is. So I say that to say, you know, who knows what the future will bring, but I think what we're committed to doing is really continuing to looking at youth individually. And so the absence of the ranch, as we like to call it, is not going to automatically mean that we're using another custodial setting. I think, you know, this pathway was created exactly for the opposite of that, so that we could take youth who were appropriate for the ranch in past years and actually intensify a community-based supervision plan, so much so that they might actually be able to remain in the community instead. So,
is there a built-in type of also effort toward reducing the racial disparities in the plan? Or is it just, this is who we always usually see, and we're just looking at the behaviors and not how the impact of racism and institutionalized racism impacts this young person? Is that built into any of the reconstruction of our youth justice system?
I think that's a big question. But what I will remind us all, I think we've heard in other settings that we participated in, if you kind of read through the various reports that were released about our juvenile justice programs, is that probation is not contributing to that racial disparity that we're seeing. Obviously, we don't have any control over, you know, who gets arrested or who gets referred or what dispositions come out of the court. That's not what our role is. So we're only involved in cases that are referred to us, and we only make recommendations to the court. And I think that is just something to really keep in the forefront of our minds when we're talking about probation practices, is that our goal is to be very individualized and to be very equitable. And we can only work with the population that is referred to us. And really, that's our focus.
I appreciate that back and forth. And maybe I'd say like a yes and thing, not a disagree, but that, you know, Kiki, I was taking from your last comments that can't be placing disparities in incarceration rates or in sentencing or placement, we could say, probation's doorstep as being responsible. And I think that's fair to say. And also, I feel like it is important for each of the different actors to be noting some parts that we're not doing as much as we could be, right? Like public defender included, right? I think that it's my goal to never be having race impacting my decisions and be intentionally never having in terms of prejudice or bias against. But I also know that there are ways that we're not meeting our potential to be able to reduce the disparities, despite the fact that it's not on any particular actor. So that's not me attempting to correct as much as just lifting up the spirit of there's always more. I know that any of the agencies, even the most exemplary, are feeling like, well, if we had more capacity and resources, we could do even more. So appreciate what probation is doing. And I'm saying that in the spirit of just our reflection of the actors, that what we bring to the table, and our shared responsibility, as opposed to there being individual responsible actor. So that said, let me ask if further discussion, I think we're still on our JJCC item, and ask if there's any public comment on this agenda item beyond what we've had this discussion. All right, I think it's appropriate then for us to move to agenda item 5, which is nominations for temporary subcommittee chair. And Patrice, I know that there was a email thread that I did have the chance to read. Basically, the idea being that we might not have elections today for official positions, but need to have someone in place in order to administrate the January or lead the January and February meetings, and ultimately an election that would happen at a later meeting. Does that sound right?
Well, I know there was a question about whether we should leave an opportunity for new members to join this committee, to then from there possibly see what opportunities among that pool would want to step in the subcommittee chair role. I think what also plays into this is the meeting frequency, which I know you guys will talk next. So given all of that, what can be done today is Jeff, as current chair, you can call for a nomination of a subcommittee chair who would then host or call the meetings to order for the next following meeting. And if that individual who sits in that seat as a chair does not want to take on the full breadth and responsibility of that, but at least would do so for the purposes of ensuring that the meeting proceeds, then they can essentially resign from that role. Well, before they resign from that role and call for nominations for a new chair. So that's what this is calling for here, or at least the context of that background discussion. However, if there's anyone here that actually would like to have take on the full role of subcommittee chair, I'm sure you would be more than happy to share with everyone what that responsibility entails, so that for any of the existing members, if they want to stand in that position, they can do so without a need to call for future nominations.
Thanks, Patrice. So right, that frames this agenda item, and what you just mentioned in terms of the description of the position. Maybe I'll just say that so that folks can have that in mind if they're considering that. Clearly, being at the monthly meetings or the subcommittee meetings themselves and facilitating, as I attempt to do here, and that good to have a bit of just kind of primer on these rules of how we take the vote, etc. But everyone's familiar with that at this point. And in between the meetings, having ideally at least one prep session with ORJ and also Burns, and what will be the new iteration of support, but basically working with facilitation to try to prepare our agenda and also try to take action, develop concepts that, for example, draft guidelines of the capacity fund or the next proposal step. Try to work on that between the meetings to have something to bring to the larger group. And having the quarterly reports that we would provide to the larger oversight body. I think those are the principal parts of it. So, yeah, maybe to just take the other moment to say, because I was thinking, where will I sprinkle this in? It's going to be my last subcommittee meeting as LB or oversight body meeting. And Chris, I see your hand. I guess I just say that I would seek beyond like this, the description of the position, to encourage everyone, but also whoever comes into the chair position to do the uncomfortable where possible. I feel that just like in my work as deputy public defender, I'm at my best, and it's inspiring when I'm disrupting a system that I know is failing and is racially unjust in so many ways. And I feel that I'm at my worst and it's least inspiring when I'm simply a cog moving the thing along. And we have the same sort of role potential here as the subcommittee and as the oversight bodies. We can be pushing uncomfortable subjects and trying to really disrupt and change the dramatic racial disparities that are persisting. Or we can be sort of something that can be pointed to as community efforts while things stay the same and we're not being aggressive with it. So it's those technical points of showing up to the meetings and preparing for them and facilitating, but it's also hopefully trying to push on points that we've agreed to and may be uncomfortable in different spaces in the spirit of really doing what we can for progress. So enough said on that, and let me invite Chris. I see your hand.
Thank you, Jeff. So first and foremost, I think you did a really nice extemporaneous job of running down what subcommittee chair does. I would expect no less. You've been in the role for a while, so you know it. But really, I just had a quick point of order. A question in the chat about the new members. Just wanted to clarify that the new members had been approved, because I know that there was, I think that had gone forward, but someone may have been erroneously left off, and there may have needed to be more action to correct that or whatever. So I just wanted to, make sure that, we are, for lack of a better term, sort of clear on the new members and ready to sort of hit the ground running, I should say, next year with them.
Yeah, good question. Actually, the last scheduled PPC meeting was for November 28th. It got canceled. That was the original date where this was going to be revisited. When I checked in with the CAO's office, I was informed that there was a plan to schedule a special meeting. So I have not heard just yet when that date will be, where this will be taken up again. But otherwise, sort of in that court there to have a special meeting to discuss sort of where folks will be placed, and then ultimately move them forward as quickly as possible for board approval. This could very well likely, though, given the holidays and the time frame and schedules, this could very well likely be extended into the early part of next year. So, yeah. Hoping to keep the ball rolling as much as possible, but that's kind of where things stand.
Thanks, Patrice and Chris, for raising that question. So knowing that that's the status of our new membership, I think we're in the position at least of having temporary subcommittee chair and then be able to potentially formalize that at the next stage. Before nominating, or at the time of nominating, let me just ask if anyone wishes to nominate another person and or nominate themselves. I was going to say before we start nominating, is anyone interested? But we can just open it both ways of saying, does someone wish to nominate themselves or another person for this chair role? I do so much talking, I have an idea though. I want to hold off before. Okay, none of us have bandwidth. We're all extremely busy working, doing too many things. I know this. And I'm wondering, without having consulted, Gigi, if you might be interested in taking this on for the Community Engagement and Funding Subcommittee. You are a community leader. You're also a faith leader, which I think would be cool to have leading as a subcommittee chair. So for many reasons, and also your role as leader, and I was talking about being willing to do the uncomfortable. Okay, enough intro. Would you perhaps consider being our temporary chair?
Sorry, I can't. I'm also mastering multitasking, and so I'm on another meeting right now, and I wouldn't be able to give it the full attention, so I regret, but no.
That's the proof is in the moment right there. Hey, I understand what you're saying. And yes, respecting the commitment that it is and where we are in needs right now, understanding. Also, Chris.
Yep. So just to, I don't know, maybe just to throw a suggestion out there, in light of, you know, the fact that we know that this is a core group of folks who are stretched really thin. You know, I don't even, if there was a way of scanning all of the Zoom meetings that happen in Contra Costa County, you'd see like these faces on a large percentage of all of them. So we get that. And in light of the fact that we may need to wait for some further clarification on new members before they can attend, which, you know, likely will impact the first meeting. And in light of the fact that I will actually be out of office the first week, which is when the agenda would be due. You know, at least the draft would be due in, right, to make sure that it gets out. I wonder if it makes sense. And I think this, you know, applies to this agenda item as well as agenda item number 6, because we've talked about that a lot. And now we're at the end of the year and we're going to have new members, you know, potentially the next time we talk about it, who wouldn't have been able to discuss it before making a shift. I wonder if it makes sense to either call a special meeting in January that's later in the month after members have been assigned, or to meet for the first time in February, hoping members would have been assigned by then, and then to have a vote at that time. And along that line, I should add, I have been known to, on occasion, when necessary, to host these meetings at least long enough for an election to be held. I could do that in February or late January if that were necessary, so that we're not putting pressure on, or, you know, loquacious and like inspiring, you know, commentary on like anybody in this session to take on the role right now. Just a thought.
I appreciate that offer to potentially fill in if we need. And also you're bringing up issues of whether it might make sense to delay, but or later in the month or February. What do folks think in response? I have to step back here for sure, since I will not be at this next stage.
Well, the comment that I put in the chat was kind of Chris was listing other reasons why, or other things that are kind of variables, and I just was adding that also our agenda item number 7 was also to discuss the meeting schedule, which could affect a number of things, or maybe it works in the favor to move to an every other month schedule to allow time for some of these other things to kind of sort themselves out. And then, as he suggested, add a special meeting on sometime in between if some decisions are made or just throwing it out there that that's also one of the variables and actually one that might work in our favor to be in a better position to make other decisions.
Good point there, Kiki. Cheryl, I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I was asking Chris the question about the verification of who is who has been confirmed is because not knowing who's confirmed is an issue. Because several of the community positions are the ones that are not confirmed. And so you were asking for, and it's not just this subcommittee. We're gonna have the same issue next week with diversion. See, I got the other meeting on my mind with diversion and the data subcommittee. You're gonna have the same issue until that is settled. We're gonna have the same issue. So I don't think that anybody can commit to anything until that is settled. But I also think that it's, I don't think it's delay. I think it's just a deferral and asking until January, until the actual oversight body is solidified and confirmed. And then having people actually come into an orientation and get on those committees, know what the committees are, commit to the committees, and then have a vote. So I say that Christopher's recommendation for deferring until January or even the first meeting in February is probably best. So people are seated and have chosen a committee or two is best, because then it's not just that they've been selected, but they also have to choose the committee, which is a different thing, right? And then once they get on the committee, have a conversation with them about becoming chair, because all of that can be overwhelming. You're a new person on the oversight body, and now we want you to chair the committee. So, yeah. Let's see. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. Chris?
Yeah, Cheryl's always, on top of things. I feel like very poignant comments here, which give me another thought. I mean, based on what you just said, it kind of sounds like, well, I guess it's not that deep, but it sounds like we should definitely try to do this. We probably want to take a significant amount of time in the quarterly, if it is in February, which it usually is, to do some of that orientation work because everybody's there, giving folks an opportunity to really understand what each subcommittee is and potentially make the decision shortly thereafter, such that, we could have those elections and make some of those decisions as the subcommittee meetings begin the week after. And I hadn't really thought about that, but I think, that's probably going to be pretty necessary at this point.
So a couple of input points that would seem like leading toward having this ultimate discussion or vote in February to give the opportunity for orientation and then our meeting after. Yeah? Others, thoughts, feedback on this? All right. So I think if we were going to go that route, then it would be, Chris, I think if you'd be willing to be facilitator of that meeting, then if it's to be the next one is in February, to steer that so that there can be ultimately the election, and then that person will be able to jump in.
Done and done.
Great. And Renell, I see your comment in chat. We'll just formally open up this discussion as well to public comment. It's not a vote, but on this agenda item, we're doing that for each. Okay. Not seeing anything further at this time. I think that would bring us to meeting frequency. So we've just had some discussion about when the next meeting will be, but would we be having meetings on a monthly or every other monthly? Those have been really the proposals so far. Suppose there could be some sort of alternate change, but I think having a monthly date, the first or third or whatever it is of the month, date of the week, usually helps rather than trying to do a 6-week, something like that. So that said, this item should be solidified as soon as we're able. We've come back to it from before. We sort of ran out of time, I think, last time, or at least didn't reach consensus on it. So I'll invite anyone on our starting off with subcommittee to give their feedback or really open up. It's small enough of a group. Anyone who has their thoughts on whether we should change the meeting frequency or stay with what we have going now.
It sounds like based on what's been discussed, it makes sense to have a meeting in January. Am I talking for you, Chris? Sorry. It makes sense to have a meeting in January, figure out what our status is, and membership and all that. And then we can decide if moving to every other month or whatever, in February or March or however it pans out, makes sense.
Yep. Right. The comments that Cheryl was talking about of we want the people who are going to be the lineup to be making these calls. And that would apply equally to this in terms of schedule, just as who would be the chair. So, yeah, Patrice.
So just for sake of clarification, are you all looking to still meet in January or February? And the reason why I ask is if we maintain the existing sort of recurring meeting date, that means the next meeting would be for January 12th. And hopefully that would be enough time for the issue around the members to be solidified. But then I also heard Chris maybe possibly suggesting orientation at the full RJOB meeting in order to kind of as a way to sort of recruit, if you will, the newer members to the new subcommittee, which that first meeting wouldn't take place till that first Thursday of February. So just in terms of sequence of events, just wanted to lay that out there and see what's more prudent time-wise.
Quick reminder that Jeff is stepping back because he's not going to be there. So we need to hear from the rest of you guys in terms of what you think about that and which direction you'd like to go.
I will go with the first request, which is waiting until January to make the decision.
Which is to say, Gigi, understanding that there would be a meeting in January as opposed to having a meeting in February.
Yeah.
Okay.
With so much going on with changes. wouldn't we want to monitor the progress of that? I mean, I'll speak for myself. I want to keep close tabs on what's happening as I report back to a group that I have that will ask me, how did the meeting go? What did you learn? Et cetera, et cetera. Thanks.
Thanks, Gigi. Jill, I see your hand.
I was just going to say if it's still up in the air as to what's going to go on with PPC and the appointment process, the next board of supervisors meeting is January 10th. So just keep that in mind. That would be the soonest, if PPC got something straightened out with the RJOB membership, that would be the soonest that it could be on the Board of Supervisors agenda for appointment of the new RJOB. So if you're having a meeting on the 12th, I'm not, I guess it would depend on whether or not there is an appointing board order that's completed or not.
Thanks, Jill. Important context there. So if I'm kind of gathering some of the things that have been said, it's sounding like, okay, a final decision on meeting frequency ought not happen until we've finalized who will be our next members of the lineup. And if that's so, then I think the only question at this moment is, will there be a meeting in January, or will the decision about everything will we forgo the meeting in January and have the discussion in February, or would there be value of having the meeting in January, knowing that perhaps we won't have the finalized lineup? And Gigi, I heard your input. Others have a take on whether we would meet in January, also considering what Jill, you just raised about the Board of Supervisors schedule.
Yeah, Patrice, when do those terms expire? Is it December 31st?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a problem because you won't have it unless something happens with PP. And I'm in the dark about PPC. We got the notification of cancellation. Supervisor Anderson is not the chair of that committee, so she's not the one who makes that decision. And I have a message out to Paul to find out if this is going to be a special meeting appointing those so that they can be seated before their expiration dates, before the terms expire. So it's an issue. Patrice, you don't know anything more than that? Okay.
No, as a matter of fact, the cancellation came as a surprise to me. So if I may, just as a
Please.
potential recommendation, we can certainly tentatively schedule the next CEF meeting for February, what am I saying here? For February 9th, I believe, which would be that second Thursday of the month. Presumably the membership, the new members for the community-based representative seats would have been resolved by then. And then hopefully I can certainly work with you, Chris, offline about the first full quarter meeting and using some time in that meeting to orient the new members as well as all the existing members to see if there will be a reshuffling of subcommittee memberships, and we could just take it from there.
Thanks, Patrice. Okay, noting my step back position, right? I'll just float that I've heard from our subcommittee members, at least. Kiki, given your feedback on date and Gigi giving your feedback on date, and we have some additional, we had the proposal from Patrice. So it's, I don't know if it's a formal motion really, as much as just a discussion of this final call, what will happen. Will there be a meeting in January? And it's not a motion, but I think the proposal on the floor here is what Patrice had said is the meeting in February. So I'll just invite a further discussion on that. And maybe more specifically to just shoot it back to, or an invitation to Gigi if you'd like to. We've had a little bit more input, context of the supervisors. I don't know your thoughts on this at this point.
So I'm trying to get all the different terminologies of the bodies of, now when we say the protected, what's the PPC stand for?
The Public Protection Committee is that.
Yeah, Public Protection Committee, and my role here is protecting the youth and those who are incarcerated from further harm. So there's always going to be more of an urgency for me to meet. I'm not worried about using it from the terminology of protecting the public. So
Yeah, so the problem is, Gigi, I think your term is expiring at the end of the year. So if you meet in January and they don't get that board order put through, then you're not a member until it is.
yeah, well, you know, doesn't mean I can't show up and speak my voice. I don't know how important it is at this point
Right,
to be
right.
a
No,
member,
absolutely.
as long as I'm expressing the concerns that I carry. Maybe I lost something in that last meeting that I did attend when they did say they were gonna reappoint my positions. There
Yeah,
was a discussion about it, so that was all of.
your seat is not up in question, Gigi.
Yeah, I don't think
There's
so.
only one seat that's up in question that somebody raised a concern. And so because of that, they didn't put through all the other seats to have a further discussion that was supposed to happen in November. And so the problem is, unless the seats are reappointed before that meeting, then it would be hard to get a quorum because you would have people who are actually not seated.
I'm just much more concerned with the protection of the young people and not what we call a committee or showing up for it or any of that. So whatever is best, whatever makes sense bureaucracy wise, let's just do it. If it means waiting to February, let's wait to February. I guess if I need to pick up the phone and call and get an update, I can do it from the staff appointed to the roles that I would be inquiring. Thanks.
Thanks, Gigi. I guess I'd say, hearing the discussion, it sounds like it's coalescing toward February for this subcommittee, and acknowledging and hearing the sense of readiness, urgency that you're expressing, Gigi, and right, which I know we all share. And also, I just want to lift up and say that I'm hearing that and feeling that also. So with this in mind, it's sounding like February for this subcommittee is the next step here, and then ultimately the meeting frequency will be decided by the new members of this subcommittee, which we'll know at the beginning of the year. Yeah. Okay. Then if I called for public comment on this item, hyper formal. Okay, we've talked about it. So I think we're then ready to move on to our community capacity fund discussion. And I'll float that we've got about 18 minutes, 17 minutes or so to talk on this and try to maybe point to areas that need to be beefed up. I'm not thinking of working on language here as much as like conceptual. You know, this part's missing, or we should really consider including something, I don't know, kind of thematic thing, you know, or this, the way this is structured really doesn't make sense. So I'll bring up, I think what I had said last time, we had little time in the discussion last time around, that this draft document is borrowing significantly from the Jeweled Legacy Group analysis, like their post analysis of the program, the AB 109 capacity fund, or capacity training. I don't know if it was capacity fund, but that project, and included in there were lessons learned, which had been highlighted in one of our subcommittee meetings and for consideration. So taking some of that in this potential proposal document, or a draft proposal document, which would be moving from our initial guidelines language and trying to move to the next phase of something that could be getting toward implementation, because we need to kind of fill in some of the general proposal concepts in order to, for example, get a proposal for facilitation to move this to the next stage. In order to have a greater facilitation, there'll need to be something on the table to be presented to, I think, ultimately the supervisors, is something worthy of having additional funding. And also it'd be something that we could be presenting to other parallel stakeholder groups, perhaps JJCC, saying this is the draft that we're working on. What do you think about collaborating on this, or making changes, or whatever it may be? So this is that, I think the concept of having this proposal document is it's a transition from where we are to the next stage, which would ultimately be.
Excuse me, Jeff, you went a
Yes.
little faint.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I'm leaning in as much as I can without hitting myself on the.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I'm not wanting that. Okay. Thank you for saying. So I guess what I'm just recapping is that this would be concept of a transition document, moving from the general, what we have now of it's a two-tiered program, and there will be a smaller cohort at the second phase and a larger group at the first phase. This is filling that out a bit so that we could get to ultimate implementation of this program and get it in effect. So this is kind of moving from where we are to the next. That said, I'll ask if anyone has thoughts on this. Maybe Chris, if there's anything you wanted to add to what I've already said in terms of what this document would be, but basically, what are we trying to work on here in this proposal?
Yeah, just I guess just a little bit of context. I'm going to try to go really fast, so we have more than 10 minutes to actually sort of get into this. And you know, probably I'm sure we'll continue this discussion next year. But you know, we got a lot of information from Jeweled Legacy Group, as Jeff mentioned before, and essentially we built some guidelines and some other sort of basic concepts about this fund. Which is one of our, you know, recommendations from the RJTF, and attempted to, you know, sort of we made a recommendation to the board and or PPC to fund technical assistance to set up the fund, feeling like this group had essentially taken the concepts as far as they could go, and that we could not administer the actual program as it, you know, was meant to be. And essentially, you know, we're told that we needed more fleshing out of the proposal, more fleshing out of, you know, the information in terms of who the fund would serve and how it was supposed to do that, and you know, sort of more nuts and bolts. And so we're looking to, you know, put a more formal proposal together that will, answer some of those questions in such a way that, that request for a technical assistance provider to actually run the fund, and to design it, in terms of, all of the little details that make it what it will be, so that can be done. So that's sort of how we got to this place. And the only other thing I would add is we've had a bit of a discussion already earlier in this meeting about how various requirements of certain grants and so on and so forth can present barriers that exclude various local community-based organizations and or service providers. And so, Jeff, I think you already lifted that was something that we wanted to make sure that we brought that lens. We wanted to make sure we brought that to this discussion. So, just asking folks to think about ways that, that idea can live in these words, or if there's a need for an added clause or section or something to sort of acknowledge how those barriers get created. And, I don't know if there's a good example of a proposal that is kind of, written in such a way to be more inclusive and more mindful of that, but making sure that we take that in mind in terms of the language that we're putting together here.
Thanks, Chris. Right, so just lifting up what I was hearing from Chris, and that this is what's needed. We were hearing from basically the supervisors that if this is going to make it to the next stage, it's going to take something more fleshed out, more detail. So that would be, we're committed to this project, and this is what we need to do to get it to the next phase. And how we try to implement, put into practice the accessibility, the concepts that we're not trying to make this something that is already or is exclusive to groups that are already doing this work on the ground, or already tapping into these funds, and trying to make sure that it's not excluding deserving and needed recipients. I think as I'm looking at some of the capacity fund implementation, that second page, some of those bullet points are, I think this is, I know that it is attempting to incorporate some of those lessons learned. And for example, the pre-project activities, those sorts of intentional rollout components in advance would be better able to, the building and things like that, to say, we at least want to make sure, or one of the commitments would be that there's broad awareness in community that this is going to be going on, this project. So avoiding folks saying, I didn't even know that this was something I could be applying for. And then getting input from community as it's rolling out in terms of its development, ways that it could be more accessible. So having kind of adequate outreach and information sharing about what the program is will hopefully reduce it being exclusive. And maybe there's also plus factors, something like that, that it's weighted in scoring concepts, so that we don't need to get into like the specific numbering, but basically, would that be something that not only we don't want to have barriers for organizations that wouldn't ordinarily have access, but maybe there could even be incentivizing, or there being considered as a positive factor, is that this applicant or potential participant hasn't had access to these resources in the past. So there's ways that maybe can facilitate that openness, because it could be built in as one of the qualifying factors to participate. maybe just inviting further on that concept of, Renella, you were on camera there for a second. I'm just wondering if you wanted to unmute, invite you to.
Negative. I was just trying to fix my camera. Sorry about that.
Got you. All good. I've been there. No problem. Right. So maybe just to expand on the point of how do we keep this from being exclusive? How do we keep this from being just the traditional actors? Because the idea is really building capacity, not just for those established actors, but ones that aren't getting the funds, aren't getting some of the additional support. So how do we build that in? Does anyone want to give input on that point specifically as we're kind of taking some time on this? Gigi, please.
Could you add language that said collaborations? So we have these established partners that we've always done business with, but we have these natural resources such as faith centers doing the work, but when they apply, they're always told they don't meet the minimum standards. So if you wrote a language suggested collaboration and even give extra points toward that, you might get the capacity building that we need to give opportunities for more culturally responsive programs.
Thanks, Gigi. Just to make sure that I'm tracking or understanding, when you're saying collaboration, meaning like, okay, one group may not be able to meet the requirements of as they're written, but if they partner with another organization, they could put their resources together and meet the.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And have that as built into the model as something that is not just permitted, but even encouraged, or as that's a plus factor.
Yeah, how would you ever get those individuals that do the work, sometimes do it really efficiently in an honoring manner, make great progress, but whenever a county contract comes out, they're not able to meet the standards, so they're not, able to compete with the bigger players, yet they continue to do the work kind of as part of their mission or their assignment, and do it not at the best capacity because they haven't built up the skill set needed because they didn't get that kind of mentoring and grooming. Even if we allow for fiscal agents that would put some standards in place and offer some technical assistance, that would even also allow us to have a broader group of providers that are more reflective of those that are being served and oftentimes are more trusted by them.
Thank you, Gigi. That really helps give context. Cheryl, I see your hand.
Yes, so let me just say this. So many of you already know that this is what I do. I especially procurement. This is what I do for a living. I'm a procurement officer. And what I will tell you is that most of the time, to Gigi's point, I'm just going to expound on it, is that is not necessarily that an organization, Jeff, the word that keeps coming up is capacity. That's not necessarily the case. What is usually the case is not just capacity or that they don't have the skills or whatever, is that if you're not awarded a contract, there's we call it an incumbency factor or an awardee bonus. So the more contracts that you're awarded, the more you're able to get professional experience. You don't get experience just by the fact that you have a good professional, that you have the education, etc. You get awarded contracts because you can prove that you can do the work. You can't prove that you can do the work unless you can then get a contract, right? So it's a catch-22. So it's not just that you can partner with somebody who's done the contract. That partnership has to allow the smaller business to take the lead on the contract. So it does no good if you partner, if that larger contractor or that experienced contractor continues to take the lead or continues to get the points for doing the work. So it has to be where the smaller contractor or the newer contractor is the one who is the foremost in doing the work and is getting the experience doing the work. This is the only way that they're going to continue to build the reputation, find the value in the work, and build up a resume and a reputation of being the professional lead on the work. That is what I see. If you're going to build, is not just the money. The money comes when you can show you have the capacity to do the work. So the success behind the implementation of a capacity fund is, I think the money goes to not only supporting the firm, but the money goes in showing them the things that they need to do right. And that means, how do I write a successful a response to a proposal? How do I write a successful response to any a grant application or to any solicitation? And what do I do when I prepare for an oral interview? Those kind of things, as the person who sits on the other side of the desk, are invaluable because no one is offering them that kind of depth of training. Or what is the debriefing that I need when I'm not successful in winning a contract? That is what is most invaluable to a lot of small businesses. And how do I walk hand in hand with somebody who's done the work and let me take the lead, and you be there to support me when I'm not successful, or to help me know what it is that I need to do? That reference list, that ability to have that kind of relevant experience, is what's going to build the capacity in the long run. That's my 5 cents worth. 5 million if you pay me a few extra dollars.
Priceless information is what I say. Thank you, Cheryl. I mean, I think we will have to, and you're going to be part of the discussions, I know it. So, but your experience, procurement officer, how this will look, I think that'll be important to take your experience along with others, but you have specific knowledge in this area. And
Yes, sir.
Yeah, of course. And, Chris, I'm seeing your note in the chat, and knowing that we are at our last minute, maybe I would float some of the language, some of the concepts that we have for the oversight body, having some intentionality in how are we going to have community seats, and who would those people be, and how would we work out what are the qualifications to do that, and trying to avoid just your general kind of chamber of commerce type of participants. Don't mean to say that disparaging, but really, what are the things that are qualifying for this? And also the RFP for facilitation for this group. Also, we're trying to have some intentionality with who will be leading this, and what are the things that are relevant expertise. And so if, for example, one of the orgs that would be receiving capacity assistance, they have some proportion of their membership or leadership formerly incarcerated or something along those lines, that's qualifying criteria, well, that might be expanding in a way that is changing the analysis of who gets considered or not. So just thinking of maybe some of the documents that we have here as launch points, and certainly what you were saying, Chris, in the chat, of looking at existing models of what can we be working from that's been successful. And since we're past time, I'll just say my thanks to you all for doing this work with me, for doing this work in your own individual spaces, and for continuing to be committed to racial justice in our community. So I respect and appreciate everyone here. And while I won't be a member of the oversight body in official form, no doubt I'll be participating and active as a member of the public. So thanks, everyone, and hope you all have a wonderful end of the year, and we'll see you after the new year.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Jeff, for your leadership, your chairmanship. We appreciate you.
absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.